Hi, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well. I know these are kind of different times, but hopefully this lecture presented in this way will get back to you. And hopefully you can take a look at it. And please let me know if you have any questions. So go ahead and use my cell phone. Hit me up on Messenger. Send me an email, whatever you want to do. We're also going to schedule some time over Zoom on our regular class nights to talk about these videos. So the idea being that you watch these videos, read the book, and then, for an hour or so on Mondays and Thursdays, we'll get together over Zoom and kind of have a virtual class and connect that way, answer any questions you have. So if you have questions as I go through this, just write them down, and we'll make sure we get them addressed. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and start chapter 38, vehicle extrication and special rescue. We're continuing. We've made it through all of the medical type chapters in the book, and now we're on to kind of some of the extra things you need to know. So Bill covered transport operations last week. We actually did incident management, and couple we used that as a class filler earlier in February, so we did that, and then we'll talk about terrorism, disaster response, and that sort of thing to round out the course. So we're getting real close. Thank you guys all for keeping with it. So we'll go ahead and get started here. All right. So, depending on who you work for, you may or may not be responsible for rescue and extrication. Many times in larger departments, combination departments where fire and EMS are together, it's the same group of people. Here at Syringa and similarly at St. Mary's, extrication is handled by the fire department. Um, Although in Grangeville, at Syringa here, we have a unique situation where it's our equipment. It's Grangeville AEMT Association and Syringa Hospital's equipment. Just our extrication crew is some of the firefighters that work with Grangeville Fire. So it's kind of separate from both EMS and from fire in some ways. But at the end of the day, there's somebody there to provide extrication, and you all are welcome to get involved in extrication if you wish. Um, Most of us EMTs have kind of stepped back from that, but there's no reason why you couldn't be involved. So this course is really just a quick overview of extrication. If you want to actually learn how to extricate, it's fairly complex. There's a lot of things to know, but we can get you some of that training as you continue through. So safety is number one, and any extrication course is going to start talking about safety. Um, Requires mental fitness, requires physical fitness. There are times where EMTs are physically taxed. We might have to carry a patient for a long ways. We might have to hike into a patient, that sort of thing. But extrication is really a whole nother level. Holding those, if you have to hold the jaws of life, then, weigh 20, 30 pounds or more. You got to pack generators down to the site, wherever that is. Sometimes around here we get lucky and a car accident occurs in a nice flat field, and you just got to make it across the ditch, and it's pretty flat and you're good to go. Other places, who knows how far you got to go to get to the vehicle. You might not even be able to get there. So, and then mental fitness, I want to talk about too. So, extrication is one of those things that it's always rushed. You have a patient that you can't get to that needs your help that you can't get to. So you have, if EMS is there, EMS is going to be there. Our job is to get to the patient. Everything we've been trained to do is get to that patient and help that patient. And now there's this period of time while extrication is occurring that you can't get to the patient. And so by that, just a function of that going on, that dynamic, extrication is a high stress environment. And you always want to go faster. There's little time to practice how to do it, go half speed when you're on the scene. When you're on scene, you're basically going as fast as you can because you're trying to get access to that patient, because we can't provide any care to that patient really until we have access. So the mental side of it is big. You might have a patient that's screaming, that they're in pain, they need help. You might have a patient that's unresponsive. You might have a patient that's deceased. A lot of times our extrication crew, we call them out so that, they can remove a body from a vehicle. And that's just tough. That's just a really hard thing. So it does require some mental fitness. As always, safety of yourself and the team is number one. PPE is going to look a little bit different for extrication. And we also need to make sure that our PPE is corresponding to the hazards we anticipate. So a little bit about PPE. Protective gear might include turnout gear, firefighter turnouts. Might include helmets, hearing protection, fire extinguisher, blood impermeable gloves. If you go on calls with me to accident, you'll notice I wear some gloves they're bright yellow, but they have a blood barrier built in, and so they're actual special rescue gloves. So they don't get cut, but they're not just leather gloves either. They have in between the inner and the outer fabric is a layer that basically a fluid resistant layer, and so you actually can wear them on a call and they would count as your PPE, BSI, scene of safe, all that. Alternatively, if what you have is leather gloves, just put on a pair of your pair of our normal gloves under the leather gloves, or whatever you have, snow gloves, whatever it is, depending on the situation. Just throw on a pair of our nitrile gloves under, and you'll be safe then against both glass or metal or whatever we have, and then or the elements, of course, and then if there's any blood or bodily fluids. So we need to talk a little bit about vehicle safety systems. These systems are designed to protect the occupant. And so we get into this interesting situation where these safety systems that are designed to save a person and are very good at that, decrease likelihood of fatalities immensely, can also be a danger to us. And so we just need to be cognizant of that. And as you go, and if you take more extrication type classes, you'll talk a lot about that. But a couple things you need to know. So bumpers can potentially, newer bumpers are designed to absorb shock, and so they can potentially recoil. And for this reason, you always want to approach vehicles from the side. Every new vehicle has airbags, and the newest vehicle has airbags. It's crazy. They're all over the place. They're front, back, side. I think Brandis told the story earlier in the class about trying to get to a patient. The hardest part was getting through all the airbags. But those airbags, there are many accidents, where if it doesn't hit the car just right, those airbags might not deploy, or maybe not all of them will deploy. And so those are a very dangerous situation to EMTs. If we're now in there and if something happens and that airbag deploys while we're inside helping a patient, that can be an extremely dangerous situation. So airbags are located in the steering wheel and in the dash. We have side and curtain airbags. Hopefully, if they're going to have deployed, they will have done it already, but you never know. And so they can spontaneously inflate and be a hazard to us. If an airbag has deployed, there'll oftentimes be kind of this powdery haze inside the vehicle, and that's normal. Usually, isn't a big deal and isn't going to cause too much issue. There is a slight risk to the eye or lung irritation from the substance, but it's usually pretty well tolerated, not a big deal. I haven't really seen any complaints of the patient. Usually they're so shaken up and dealing with other things that isn't an issue. Could potentially be an issue for the responder. Just depends. Okay, a couple of fundamentals of extrication, very similarly to transfer operations. These are going to look pretty similar. But through all of this, your primary concern is safety. Our job, until you're on a dedicated extrication crew, our job is to provide emergency medical care and prevent further injury to the patient. We might be doing some of that as extrication happens around us. So there are times where you can get in a back door but not a front door, and so we might be treating the patient from the back seat while they're trying to open up an area in the front driver's area so that you can get a person out. We might be stabilizing a head or a neck, cervical spine stabilization while they do something. One of the recent ones I was on, the car was on its side, and we'll talk here in a little bit. Easy access, anytime you break glass and get enough room to get a patient out, that's going to be one of the easiest things we can do. We were breaking out extrication unit was breaking out a really large sunroof. And EMS's job while they were doing that was to put a blanket over the patient and make sure that no glass shards landed on the patient. And so we might be assisting in that way as well. A little bit of a definition. So extrication is the removal from entrapment or a dangerous situation. An entrapment is a person being caught and has no way to get out of that situation. So it could be the whole body, or it could be just a limb or something like that. But that's what we're talking about. There are 10 phases of extrication: preparation and route to the scene, arrival and scene size up, hazard control, support operations, gaining access. This is kind of the big bullet. This is where all the magic happens. So up until that point, you don't usually aren't able to get to the patient, or aren't able to get to the patient enough to get the patient out. Then we have some emergency care we're going to do. And again, that will be a kind of a delicate balance of how much we're going to do on scene in the car versus after we get the patient removed from the car. So leading to that is the removal of the patient, transfer of the patient, and then termination of the extrication, which is really where our transport and our patient care is really going to begin. So through all this, EMS is going to be taking care of the patient. We're going to be providing medical care, triaging and packaging the patients. There's a lot we can do sometimes, and other times there's nothing we can do. Other times there is no way into that car. Maybe it's rolled and the doors have been bent a little bit. You can't open any of the doors. For whatever reason, you can, you might be able to open a window or break out a window, but that doesn't give you enough access or whatever it is. If nothing else, if you can talk to the patient through the door or through the car, that's going to be a benefit. And then obviously after the patient is removed from the car, then it's kind of back to normal. We're providing transport to the hospital, and it's kind of back into normal EMS operations from there. So the extrication team is going to be securing and stabilizing the vehicle. Stabilizing is really important. Not only do we have to get the patient out, but we have to make sure that vehicle isn't going to roll. We talked about the airbags going off. A lot of times vehicles are laying in some strange positions. So we got to be prepared for that, and you might have to block up the vehicle or make sure it's not going to roll further, tether it off even sometimes. Providing safe entrance and access to the patient, that's what extrication is all about, and then actually removing that patient or the actual extrication of the patient from the vehicle. anytime you are at a motor vehicle accident, there's going to be law enforcement. Depending on where you're at, you might beat law enforcement. Law enforcement might beat you. You might get most of the way through this before law enforcement arrives. It just depends on where you are. If it is on a highway, most often law enforcement is going to get there either before you or soon after you. But if you're up in the mountains, it's really hard to say who's going to get there first or how long it's going to be. Law enforcement has an important role here for controlling traffic, maintaining order at the scene, and doing their crash investigation type stuff. Firefighters are not always in our area involved in extrication. In Cottonwood's response area, I believe they are. But if you do have fire on scene, they're going to be responsible for extinguishing fires, preventing additional ignition, looking, giving you some help with, okay, what's that fluid leaking? Is that radiator fluid or is that, gas? Because that's a very different situation. If you're with a crew like Grangeville and extrication arrives without a fire apparatus and you think you need one, just request one. Always err on the side of caution. If there's something you don't know how to deal with, make that request to dispatch and get them coming. The preparation phase, much like the preparation phase that Bill talked about, we're training, we're making sure equipment is in order, we're making sure that we know what we're going to do, we're making sure that we can operate as a team, and that once we go in there, everybody knows their role, how we're going to address that. Little things like making sure that we have an extrication team identified and that there's a way for dispatch to contact them, and that we know that when we say, hey, extrication is needed, that it's going to come, that they're going to show up with equipment, their vehicle is going to start. All of that is part of the preparation phase. Preparation is really designed to reduce the possibility of something going wrong on scene. So it's really important. En route to the scene, very similar to the phases of the ambulance call. You're gathering information, you're figuring out what you need to know. Make sure you contact dispatch if you have any questions about other resources being dispatched, if extrication is being sent. Unless it's a very unique situation, you should always make sure an ambulance is en route as well, and generally law enforcement as well. So dispatch will be your key. Remember that you need to drive appropriately en route to the scene. It's not going to benefit anybody if you don't make it there because you got in an accident. Arrival on the scene and scene size up. Again, positioning is important. Position the ambulance, and here this would be position our extrication rig, which is in our case an old ambulance. You're going to want to make sure you're using warning lights. Don't get blocked in. With the extrication rig, I'm much less concerned about getting blocked in. You want to make sure the ambulance won't get blocked in. I don't really care if the extrication rig gets blocked in. That would be fine. For the ambulance, again, make sure it's pointed towards the scene to facilitate patient transport. For any vehicle at a hazardous materials incident, including just gasoline spilling from the vehicle, make sure you park uphill and upwind. You're going to make sure the scene is properly marked and protected. Law enforcement is going to be your biggest resource here. And scene size up is going to start from the minute you get there, and it's going to continue the entire time. You're going to be looking for anything out of the ordinary. Keeping your head on a swivel, making sure that you're looking all around, seeing any hazards that might be there, and taking care of those. And fire, we used to have a saying, and actually turned into a class: look up, look down, look all around. And that's exactly what you're doing here. You're looking for down electrical lines, leaking fluid, fire, broken glass, whatever it is. You want to make sure you're looking for, keeping an eye out for any hazards that might be there. Maintain situational awareness, which is, again, that look up, look down, look around, the ability to recognize possible issues And we're going to try to mitigate those issues ahead of time before they cause an issue for us. Again, some things we're going to be looking at: smoke or fire, trapped or ejected patients, number of patients and vehicles involved. If there is somebody in the vehicle that is conscious and can tell you, you always want to confirm how many patients or how many occupants there were in the vehicle. It's really hard to determine if there's going to be another patient that would happen to be ejected, or maybe it's a child or something that's in a spot that you can't quite see. So always try to confirm how many patients were in the vehicle, or use your context clues. If you got a car seat in the back and you can't find the kid, that should raise your index of suspicion a little bit. You might spend a little bit more time looking around than you normally would if it was just a single cab pickup and one occupant. Okay, that's probably pretty normal. If there's nobody that can talk to you, everybody's unresponsive, spend some time looking around, making sure you don't have another patient that you didn't know about. Be sure to note the damage to the vehicle. In the trauma overview chapter, we talked about the significant mechanisms of injury, and how far intrusions into the cab and that sort of thing. So now is really that time to take note of all that as you're doing your scene size up and approaching the vehicle. Unrestrained patients might have contact injuries as well as secondary injuries. Be sure to look for a starred windshield. That's going to be a real good indication that either a head hit the windshield, or if the patient was restrained, possibly without an airbag, or if they were unrestrained, might be more than just the head, might be the whole body. Any starring of a windshield, any damage to the steering column, you are automatically going to be providing cervical spine considerations and immobilizing the spine, placing the C-collar on and then securing them. Again, not to a long backboard as we used to do, but making sure that they're secured to the gurney and telling the hospital that you're concerned about cervical spine injuries. Really, any vehicle accident, we should be concerned about cervical spine injuries, but especially damage to an area, that damage that only a head could really cause, right? The windshield or to the steering column. We want to definitely be proactive about that. Very likely we'll need additional resources. Extrication equipment, that's kind of what this is all about. You might need a fire department, law enforcement, hazmat unit, utility company if there's power poles involved or gas lines. You might need to call for life flight. Might need to do it from the scene. Remember that life flight's time to get to any place is pretty well fixed. In Grangeville, 35 minutes. If you roll up and you know that it's bad and you got 20 minutes of extrication to do before you get to the patient, well, shoot, by the time you do that, life flight might be 10, 15 minutes away. Might be even quicker to get to life flight than it would be to get to the hospital. So take all of that into account. Again, some more potential hazards. Be concerned in the winter. We do a lot of this in the winter, it seems like. Something caused that vehicle to wreck, and it could have just been a fluke and a one-time incident, or it could have been something, maybe it was a really, really slick road around a corner, or black ice, or maybe you're at the bottom of the hill and the next vehicle that comes down is going to do the same thing. I think we've probably all seen those YouTube videos of buses sliding down streets, snow-covered streets, and then next car comes and it slides down, and then the next car comes and slides down, and then the plow vehicle comes and it slides down, and they're all piling up at the bottom, right? So where do we want to make sure we're not going to be is at the bottom. That is not a scene that is safe if there's a high likelihood that the next vehicle are going to come and slide right on into us. Coordination and communication is everything. You got to be talking to everybody. If it's a large incident, there might be an incident commander. If it's just our ambulance and officer and the extrication crew, we're probably not going to say, oh, this is mass casualty incident and necessarily formalize the ICS system. But like I mentioned in the incident command structure and incident command system lecture, every single call we go on has some elements of ICS involved. So it would be that lead EMT. If you don't know who is the IC, it's probably going to be that lead EMT on scene or law enforcement officer. A couple of hazards that you might run into, very likely. Down electrical lines are pretty common. Obviously, never attempt to move them. If the line is over the vehicle, instruct the patient to remain in the vehicle until the power is shut off. They're insulated and safe there. And then always make sure you remain a safe distance away from the power line. So, just like a hazmat situation, you have a little bit of a hot zone around the vehicle. So this is kind of just a danger zone where there's sharp metal edges and broken glass and maybe some toxic substances, radiation, maybe hopefully not, and hazardous materials. I would definitely take this into being a hazmat incident. You can see here's a good picture. Ambulance is far, far away from the mess, so you're not going to be able to get that patient out of the car until that power line is removed off the car. So there's a lot of physical hazards, but there's also other hazards such as family members and bystanders. Sometimes there could have been some violence, domestic violence or otherwise, that led to the accident itself. Bystanders could be involved and get get riled up or create an issue. So make sure that you secure an area around the vehicle and limit that to bystanders. Family members, if they're behaving well and can be safe, they can stay a little bit closer sometimes. But again, they shouldn't be right up in there where you're working, because that is not a safe zone. That is still in that danger zone. The vehicle is the primary hazard most of the time. It might be on its side or on its roof. You need to stabilize the car. And a couple of key points with that is to move the car into park, or shift the car into park if you can. Put the e-brake on if you can. And battery cables should be disconnected. Both to minimize the possibility of sparks or fire, but also because at least older generation airbags, and most airbags up until you get to electric vehicles, if you disconnect the battery, the airbag won't be able to inflate after that, and so you can reduce some of that potential harm to yourself. When you cut the battery cables, I don't usually cut both, usually just cut the positive, but cut it in two places. That way it can't, you have, battery and you just cut it in one spot, it could still potentially come back and make contact. But if you cut it in two spots and then there's no possible way that that battery is going to be able to make a connection again. So alternative fuel vehicles, especially electric vehicles, are a dangerous situation. This course does not go over them. That's a whole other level. Oftentimes the batteries are going to be in the trunk or under seats. Oftentimes, especially in electric vehicles, there's going to be more than one battery. They're very heavy. You want to disconnect the batteries. Oftentimes there is a higher voltage line. Oftentimes that line is going to be red instead of the normal, or orange, excuse me. It's going to be an orange battery cable instead of the normal black cables. Make sure that you know what you're doing before you start messing with those. They do need to be disconnected, but they are higher voltage, and you need to have a little bit of experience disconnecting those before you go ahead and do that. After you disconnect those battery cables, it might take quite some time to de-energize the car, 10 minutes or longer. Support operations, there's a lot of support that happens on these scenes. Lighting the scene, getting tools out, packing tools from the rig down to the scene, starting generators, getting troubleshooting generators, all sorts of stuff. But lighting and electricity or mobile power plant are the two big ones. So getting the generator out close enough to where you're going to be able to get it to go. And then setting up lights. Those are going to be the primary things. And you guys can be packing, whoever's not actively working on, patient care at that time can be packing gear for the extrication crew. Getting access is what it's all about. This is what we're there for. Make sure we can get access to that patient. So make sure the vehicle is stabilized first. Hazards are mitigated to the extent we can. Then we're going to identify the way that we're going to gain access. Always use the safest, most efficient way to gain access. And sometimes you might have multiple patients. Make sure you know where the patient is. You might have to change your course of action depending on what's going on. If the patient is responsive and goes unresponsive, you might not be able to do the full-blown full meal deal that you were planning on. You might have to do some sort of rapid extrication. Maybe it's you take them out a window, or you do something that's maybe a little bit less than ideal. At some point, you still have to have enough space to get the patient out, but you might need to move them quicker. For instance, if you need to start CPR or something like that. So the patient's going to remain inside. Obviously, if the patient wasn't going to remain inside, you wouldn't be extricating them, but you need to keep the patient safe while they're there. So we use heavy blankets, drape it over the patient. That will protect them as glass and metal start flying. Backboard can be used as a shield. That's a good idea. Always talk to your patient, even if they're not completely responsive. Talk to the patient and let them know what's going on. And then try to keep stuff minimized around the patient. You don't want to cause any additional harm. So simple access is the preferred method. So check doors first. Never start extricating a patient until you've checked all 4 doors. So always do that. Ask the patient to hit the unlock button. Always try that. If that doesn't work, you might need to go to the next step, which might be looking at, can you get them out through a window, or breaking glass is good. I recommend, glass is going to get broken at some point anyway. I recommend breaking glass. Just if you can't get into the patient any other way, even if you're not going to be able to get the patient out through the glass window, at least then you're going to be able to communicate with the patient better and tell them what's going on. So go ahead and break through that, and we'll just open it up a little bit more. Door handles, roll down windows, all those sorts of things should be tried. Break a window and then check the door from the inside and see if you can get it. That sort of stuff should all be considered. Complex access, if the easy methods don't work, then we're doing stuff like jaws of life, and we're cutting. We're actually going to cut into the car. This is really what extrication courses are all about. How to remove the car. They can take a car and turn it into anything they want. So here's a picture of some of that. Some of the more common ways of gaining access are cutting doors off, cutting the roofs off and rolling back the roof, basically turning the car into a convertible. That's fairly common. Sometimes you can just cut a couple of posts and get one door kind of off and get through there. They can cut through steering columns. They can move gas and brake pedals out of the way if that's what's going on. Basically, if it's there on the car, between their spreaders and cutters and that sort of thing, they can get in. So after we do that, we're going to provide care to the patient. provide manual stabilization of the spine almost every time. If there was enough force to damage the car that you can't get the patient out, there's enough force that you're going to need to manually stabilize the spine. And then we're into ABCs, and I'm not going to go through all that because you guys have been spending the last 6 months going over ABCs. But once you get to the patient, then it's game on. Business as usual. Take care of the patient. Going to remove the patient after that. And the folks that just made a hole in the car for you to get the patient out of are going to be the ones that are going to help you figure out how to do that. But generally, you're going to get them out, through whatever hole that is. It's oftentimes going to take extra hands. Oftentimes, there's law enforcement on scene. They're going to have to come over and help. And a lot of that is oftentimes you're going to have suboptimal lifting conditions. You might only be able to get one arm and lift with one arm, and somebody else has to reach in through another area and lift. And so, where two people might be able to move the patient pretty easily, in these situations, if you're only able to get one hand there, you might need quite a bit more help to get the patient out. Again, some of those complex access techniques. This really, again, is what extrication courses, specialized extrication courses are all about. Make sure you always protect your patient as you're moving them out. Make sure they're not going to get glass on them or get cut, that sort of thing. And again, it's really a team exercise. Getting the patient out between the extrication crew, the EMS crew, law enforcement, everybody involved is going to be working together. Good communication is key. Just over communicate is better. You're going to get the patient out, make sure the spine is manually stabilized, apply a cervical collar. To reiterate once again, we don't strap patients down to backboards other than you might in this case to extricate, but as soon as you get back to the ambulance, you're gonna get them off that. But make sure you get them secured to the gurney and immobilize that spine as good as you can, as rapidly as you can. Like anytime we're moving a patient, one person is in charge. Choose a path that requires the least manipulation. Choose the path that's the easiest for everybody. So if once they get out of the car, you got a choice of walking an extra, maybe 50 feet to get around an embankment or going straight up an embankment, you're probably going to be better off to walk around. Generally is going to be a lot less issues if you can walk around a hazard rather than trying to go over it or through it. Okay, termination of the extrication is going to be when they hand them off to the ambulance, and so then we do our thing, and that's go time for us. We're going to be doing the patient assessment, figuring out what's going on, and initiating the transport of that patient. And then the extrication crew will stay on scene. They'll take care of their equipment, make sure it's all reefer, make sure generators are topped off with fuel, all that sort of thing. Make sure the extrication vehicle is topped off with fuel, and do their thing that way. So that's where we part ways, and they finish stuff off on their end, and we continue on with patient care. The next portion of this lecture is some specialized rescue situations. We're going to go through these real briefly. For each of these, there's a specialized team that is going to be skilled at doing this sort of thing. So for us, most of the time in these situations, Grangeville Mountain Rescue is going to be the unit that is going to provide these skills for us. There are some exceptions to that. For instance, dive rescue would be the dive team in rig-ins, hazmat type stuff would be, Lewiston Fire. They might also have some confined space training, although Grangeville Mountain Rescue does as well. But for each of these, this is something that you can be aware of, but that we're not necessarily going to do unless you're a member of some of those more specialized teams. So here's some additional type rescues that you might need to talk about. A specialized team that is becoming more popular now is tactical teams, and oftentimes there are SWAT teams that have medical type folks on them, and we're gonna, you know, even without a specialized SWAT team with a medical person involved, we're going into the warm zone and active threat type situations, and so we're working more and more with law enforcement in that way. Whitewater Rescue is another one that Reagan's dive team, and then Ryan Turner with the BLM has some expertise in whitewater rescue. You can get in touch with him if you're interested. Technical rescue situations, again, you need to have technical skills and equipment. Oftentimes, there will be EMTs that are members of some of these different groups. When you arrive on scene, check with the IC if one's identified, or more often ask dispatch, see if they've been one of these teams have been dispatched. You tell dispatch what you need, and they'll help you get it. That's their role in all this. Oftentimes there'll be a staging area where you're going to wait until the patient comes to you. Search and rescue is a very popular one. So search and rescue will call for an ambulance once they get to the point where they're going to have found that patient and going to be bringing them out, making sure the patient's still alive and all that. They will need an ambulance, and so you'll be responding to there. Just tie in with whoever's in charge of that command post, IC or staging manager or somebody like that. They'll give you a briefing, let you know what's going on, how long it's going to be till the patient's there, where you can meet the patient at, that sort of thing. If you have access to a family member of the lost individual, again, just like any other time, see if they can give you any sample history, allergies, medications, that sort of thing. And once that missing person is found, they'll be brought to you, or you'll be told where to relocate the ambulance to. This could involve anything. There might oftentimes will be four-wheelers involved, horses, helicopters, hard to say. Anything can develop. But at the end of the day, as long as you know where the patient's going to end up and where you're going, you'll be able to get to that patient. And this is true of a lot of things, not just search and rescue, but Grangeville Mountain Rescue Unit is really going to take the place of many of these specialized units that we're going to talk about here for a minute. Trench rescues. Trenches are very dangerous, and dirt is extremely heavy. Really falls into that confined space rescue type stuff. Grain bin rescue is another one that Grangeville Mountain Rescue practices for. That is a very similar situation. There's a lot of risks associated there. We should always make sure that we're parked far away. If it is underground, secondary collapse is possible, and we want to make sure we're not going to contribute to that. And always be on the lookout for other hazards that might be involved as well. Key for us, if it's trench is deeper than 4 feet, and that's still getting pretty deep, do not enter it without training, without specialized equipment, and without shoring in place. If you see a trench being dug by somebody and it's more than 3 or 4 feet deep and there's somebody in the bottom of it, don't engage until you get somebody that knows what they're doing there. So tactical emergencies, we are getting involved here. So if you're medical personnel embedded in a SWAT team, they would be holding a weapon and they would be going into the hot zone as part of the law enforcement team. Most often going to be a member of that, an actual law enforcement officer of some sort. However, we're going the direction of one step down from that, where we're not going into the hot zone, we're not holding weapons, but we're going in the warm zone. So there's still an active threat. The warm zone could be made into a hot zone at any time, just takes one bullet flying. And so we do a lot of training with our EMS crews on getting trained into how to work with law enforcement, go into those warm zones. You're having armed escorts anywhere you go. You're going down safety corridors to the patient. You have security, which basically means you got a cop with a gun leading you in, protecting you while you're there. You're getting patients and headed back out into, basically in a situation that could be a hot zone again at any time. So that's really where we are fitting into this. When you get involved in that, there's a lot of stuff you need to know. Last fall, we had a 3-day long training, joint training. So Cottonwood was there, Grangeville was there, Kamei was there, Kuski was there, I think. Law enforcement and fire and EMS going through all this. It was called the Active Response Integrated Threat course. Extremely good course. I highly recommend it if we ever get in the area again. But they'll talk to the specifics about a lot of this stuff. But don't respond with lights and sirens. Absolutely not. You don't want a perpetrator to know that you're out there. That will make you a bigger target. Dispatch, if you're dispatched to something like this, dispatch will tell you where the staging area is. Go to the staging area, nowhere else. Follow the route to the staging area that they tell you to go, because that is going to be a relatively safe area. And then don't move from the staging area until you're told to do so by somebody who's in charge. Planning measures are key. Absolutely, that's what training is all about. Is these planning measures. Another type of emergency, specialized response team structure fires. So obviously we have structure firefighters that are going to be the ones that are going to do the heavy lifting here. So in our area, for the Grangeville and Grangeville fire response area, an ambulance will only be called when they have firefighters going inside a burning building, which is not the majority of fire calls, but anytime they do send somebody into a building, they're packing up, putting an SCBA on, making entry into a burning building. In those situations, they will be calling for an ambulance to be on standby. And we are there just for that. We are there for standby. We are not firefighters. We are not helping get inside the building. We are not, they're bringing patients to us. Even if it seems like relatively safe, you are not going in a burning building. There's never a time where you should go into a burning building unprotected. You are there. Firefighters will bring you patients, and you will treat the patients afterwards. But really, we're there for standby. Most of our patients on structured fires, oftentimes are the firefighters themselves. Hit with a nozzle or slipped and fell or something like that. Pretty minor injuries, but oftentimes that's the role we take. Make sure you tie in with somebody and ask where you should park. One big thing, do not ever drive over a fire hose. I don't care how bad it is or what the situation is, until you're going to get burned over and you got to go get out of there rapidly. Do not drive over a fire hose. You should be pretty far back, and they'll let you know where you want to park, and there'll likely be additional fire apparatus coming in behind you, and they'll need access. So you're until there's actually a patient, you're a pretty minor part of the situation, the scene, really just there on standby. So be accessible, but don't be in the way. And you're going to stay in the ambulance, and they're going to bring patients to you. You stay there until you're relieved by the IC or by whoever's in charge of that incident, or if you're transporting a patient. And of course, there's potential for hazardous materials. And so if that happens, go ahead and call for hazmat response. State communications is going to be able to get you hazmat as well as going through dispatch. So that's the end of this chapter. I'm not going to go through the review questions. If you're interested in seeing them, let me know. If you have any questions, we will be meeting on Monday night, 7:30 to 9, to send out the link for the Zoom virtual meeting. We will be discussing anything you want to talk about from this chapter, from transport operations, from special patient populations. I know we haven't been able to do these last couple lectures interactive, but hopefully everybody's caught up. Hopefully everybody's done the reading, and then we can just kind of informally just kind of shoot the shit and talk about what's going on, what you guys took out of these lectures. You guys can tell us if these are working well or if we need to reevaluate how we're doing these. It seems to be a pretty good system, but your feedback is always appreciated. So with that, hope everybody's doing well. Please contact Brandis or I if you have any questions at all, or just life questions in general. If you want to know how our ambulance is doing, responding to or getting geared up for coronavirus, or have questions about what you should be doing, just let us know. Especially in these times where we can't get together in person, it's nice to reach out to one another. Be sure to reach out to your classmates, your instructors. Your instructors very well could be going crazy. They might need somebody to send them a text and see how things are going. So anyway, hope everybody's doing well, and appreciate you listening, and we'll chat soon. Thanks. Bye.